Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Scarborough Public Library. I bet you're surprised to hear that. I'm Elsa Rowe. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here, so I do the planning for events in the library. And I'm joined with Tom Corbett, our Systems Librarian. Thank you very much, Tom. This series, Scarborough in a Changing Climate, is a joint effort of the Scarborough Conservation Commission, the Scarborough Land Trust, Scarborough Public Library, and Friends of the Scarborough Marsh. We start each of our events with a brief land acknowledgement.
The Scarborough Public Library acknowledges that it is located in the traditional homeland, past and present, of tribes in the Wabanaki Confederacy. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Confederacy: the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseets, and the Micmac, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We acknowledge the Owaskoag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough. We respect the traditional values of these tribes and support their efforts for land and water protection and restoration. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Smith. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of the Friends of Scarborough Marsh, and I'm here to introduce Greg Byther, who's going to be doing the first presentation. Greg joined the board of the Friends in 2014, and probably starting in 2016-17, he was kind of the lead person on all our water quality monitoring, and he, with a very few other volunteers, has maintained that until now, even though he is retired both from the Scarborough school system and also from the Friends of Scarborough Marsh board. Excuse me. Greg got his BS degree from Yale in geophysics and a master's in education from the University of Southern Maine. He has taught or administered in Noble and Marshwood, and most of you may know him from Scarborough, where he taught physics at the high school for many, many years. And I think that's all I want to say. Greg, go on up.
Thanks, Stephanie. Great to be here. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Friends of Scarborough Marsh do, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I do as far as water quality monitoring in the marsh, and also about how that may be affected by climate change. Here's a nice picture of the Scarborough Marsh. That's the Libby River right there. That's really close to one of the places where we take water samples, and it's a beautiful marsh. Scarborough Marsh is the largest marsh in Maine. It's an incredible resource that we've been trying to preserve for the future generations. Now, the Friends of Scarborough Marsh has three major areas of focus. First area of focus is conservation, and we've worked with the Scarborough Land Trust and also the Bureau of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to protect the land around the marsh by purchasing property that's come up for sale or that people have donated to the Scarborough Land Trust, and also sometimes they will work with us to get a better price to preserve a piece of land through the Friends of Scarborough Marsh. And the idea is that we're trying to preserve infringement on the marsh by buying up properties or somehow or providing set-asides for properties that are on the fringe of the marsh, so that development does not infringe on the marsh and degrade its quality. It's a great resource, not just as a beauty of nature, which obviously it is, but also as an ecological buffer for all of the less conducive to life things that man might do. For instance, the washing of the water in and out certainly removes a lot of the pollutants that come down some of the rivers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's conservation. We're trying to conserve the marsh for future generations. Obviously, we enjoy it now, just as the Indians enjoyed it when they lived here, and we would like to preserve it for future generations. Second major area of focus is research. And the Friends of Scarborough Marsh have been researching the causes of some of the invasive species that have come into the marsh. The biggest one is Phragmites, which is, if you drive down Route 1 over the marsh, you'll see these huge reeds. Those are Phragmites. That's actually an invasive species from Europe. And it's outcompeted native species like cattails, which used to inhabit those wetlands now. And they're kind of choking out all the other life. So we'd like to try to abate those as well as we can. So we're conducting studies on how to restrain those invasive species. Some of the methodologies we're testing to see how much salt content reduces their viability in the environment. And we've seen studies that indicate that might be a working method, is to increase salt content. So obviously, in the marsh, one of the biggest things that's going to determine whether these invasive species can, or at least this invasive species can survive, is the salinity content in the water. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later on when I talk about the water testing. But we've also done some testing, with salinity to see what happens. When you try to, what happens to the invasive species when the salinity changes. Also, we've been working with the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Maine DEP. They have a research, yes. So they have a program called the Volunteer River Monitoring Program, or VRMP, which we're a part of. And rivers throughout Maine have volunteers who go to the river on a periodic basis and take water samples, testing for various indicators of water health. And we're part of that. We have 8 sites that we monitor throughout the marsh. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about what I do. But we take water samples to test for bacteria, and we also will test for other major indicators of water health. All right, and also the third major area of focus for the Friends of Scarborough Marsh is education. We have a number of outreach programs. We've been working with the schools, trying to get the schools more involved in the marsh, because we believe that, if you know more about something, you're obviously going to care more about it and be more likely to try to preserve it. We also have developed a map of Scarborough Marsh, and we've been distributing that throughout the community to try to promote the features of the marsh that people might want to explore and enjoy. And also there are lots of other educational outreach programs going on. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, let me go back. Oh, so if you are interested, here is a link to the Friends of Scarborough Marsh. And there's the webpage. If you'd like to get involved, we'd love to have your help. Always looking for volunteers, and also people that serve on the board as well. There are lots of projects here. There's lots of things to you can donate if you'd like, Could always use more money. It's expensive to buy properties. And then there are projects here. What else we got here? Okay, so again, it's a great map. There's also lots of great pictures here. I'm not going to go through the whole website, but there's lots of neat stuff. And it's scarboroughmarsh.org, and it's right on my program. So if you're interested in that, check it out. There's lots of fun stuff to do there too. All right, so here is Scarborough Marsh. So why is climate change a big concern for us? Well, because obviously the marsh is right at sea level. And one of the biggest things that people are worried about with climate change is the possibility that the sea level might rise up to 20 feet and over the course of 100 years, possibly, depending upon the actions of man. And the sea level rise will threaten our marsh and the surrounding areas. Obviously, if the sea level rises, it's gonna push the marsh further inland, which will inundate some houses and some properties. So that's, and it also will change the way nature reacts with the water, because it's gonna submerge a lot of the plant life that's already there, eliminating habitat for birds and small creatures that inhabit the marsh. Also, it's going to, if the sea level rises, you're going to have to change road designs. If you're driving across Route 1, that's the biggest example I have. If, you know, if the sea level rises 3 or 4 feet, Route 1 will be underwater, and that's not good. You're gonna have to rebuild that whole road. Also, as sea level rises, more water will come in and out of the marsh, because there'll be a larger area. It's like a big, you know, if you think about the Scarborough Marsh, like it's a big bathtub. Well, if the bathtub gets bigger, it takes more water from the ocean, so there'll be more water flowing in and out with the tides. And so there are tidal restrictions inside the marsh that are gonna prevent that from happening. And so those tidal restrictions will have to be modified so that as the water levels rise. And that's obviously gonna be very expensive. And so we have to start to plan for that. So obviously that's one of our concerns. And no, it's not easy to plan for that in the future. All right. So I wanted to talk, next thing I wanted to talk about is my role in the Friends of Scarborough Marsh. For the most part, has been in data collection in Scarborough Marsh. And we started before this, we started monitoring a problem that we had seen in Millbrook. If you know where Millbrook is, it starts actually right up behind this building, and it goes all the way down in through, it goes out, comes down behind Scarborough Downs, and it goes across the river, and it goes down into the marsh right beside Willowdale. And there was a problem identified with that river. They thought was polluting the marsh, and that's why they had to close the clam flats for a long time. Well, for a long time, the clam flats were closed, and which eliminated the livelihood for a lot of clam diggers. So we were monitoring to see if we could identify what this point source was, if there was a point source for that pollution. And we think we identified that. We monitored a bunch of sites on the Millbrook for a couple of years when I first started out with the Friends of Scarborough Marsh. And then after that, we thought, well, let's see if we can, we really should try to take the temperature of the marsh. So in other words, what's the health of the marsh? What does it look like? Is it healthy? What are the major indicators of health? Can we monitor those? And then over time, can we see if they're changing? And of course, as a scientist, that's music to my ears. I want to say, okay, let's look at some data, and let's see what's happening, because otherwise you're just guessing, right? You don't really know unless you have data to go by. So we chose the major tributaries to the marsh. We chose 8 tributaries, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And we decided we wanted to monitor those every 2 weeks, and from May through October. And then we worked with the Maine DEP through because we knew they had this volunteer river monitoring program. So they are a big partner of ours, and they help us in a lot of different ways to complete this work. One of the biggest things they do is they provide us with the probe that we use to collect data on temperature, dissolved oxygen, and conductivity. Again, and I want to show you that right now. As a matter of fact, let me just take a moment here. We can turn the lights up a little bit. I'll show you some of the things, the materials that we work with, me and the volunteers. I have a number of different volunteers that help me out. Throughout the years, we've had a lot of volunteers. We've had some college students, which is great. It's great. As a teacher, I love working with young people. So we had some college students this summer who helped us out. And we also have a lot of local volunteers. We collect data like every 2 weeks. And it has to be coinciding with the tides. So the tides, if you know how the tides work, they change. The low tide is always It's like every 2 weeks, it's a day later, so. 2 weeks ago, we collected, or a week and a half ago, we collected data on a Saturday. And next week I collect data on a Monday, and then the week after that, it's on a Tuesday. So, and it's always supposed to be in the morning now. The DEP would like us to collect data early in the morning, because the dissolved oxygen content is lower at that point. So you're gonna get a better reading on whether the water body is healthy if you take your data in the morning, because that's when you're gonna, as the day goes on and the sun hits the water, dissolved oxygen, it gets deposited in the water, and the dissolved oxygen, even though a water body might be degraded, the dissolved oxygen content might increase during the day. And dissolved oxygen is one of the things that we do test for. We test for the amount of dissolved oxygen in water as it's milligrams per liter, okay, kind of technical, but it's just the total amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. And then we also convert that into a percentage, like 100% dissolved oxygen. That's as much dissolved oxygen as you can get in water. And so it's also a function of the temperature of the water. So that's dependent upon the temperature and how much the total content is in the water. So we take those two measurements of dissolved oxygen, and obviously if you're a fish, you need to have dissolved oxygen in the water, otherwise you can't breathe, right? Because that's what they do, their lungs, they take in dissolved oxygen. Most water animals need dissolved oxygen to live. So it's a good indicator of the health of the water. So here is I get my probe out here. There we go. Okay. So, and this is again this is provided by the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP from Maine. And it's a probe like this. And this is the readout. You can see right now it says 9.88 dissolved oxygen, 109%. That's because it's not in the water, it's in the air. Right, and there's more oxygen in the air than there can be in the water. So, and it also gives me a temperature right now, which is 22.1 degrees centigrade. That's probably the temperature in this room. And the SPC, it says 0.0. So that's, and SPC is specific conductance, and that is a measure of how easy it is for electricity to be conducted through the water. Now that will measure a number of different things. It will measure both the amount of pollutants in there, because pollutants such as heavy metals and road grime and dirt will actually make the water more conductive. It makes it easier for electricity to flow through the water. So that will affect the specific conductance. And also salinity, because salt is a good conductor of electricity. So salt water conducts electricity better than fresh water does. So when we have two different types of sites that we measure, that we take measurements of. And one, we have 3 rivers that are freshwater where we test as freshwater. That's Millbrook, Willowdale, and Phillipsbrook. Okay, and then we have 5 other sites that are brackish or saltwater, and those are Libby River, Nonsuch River, Finnard Brook, Cascade Brook, and Jones Creek. And I'll show you a map that has all those on it, so there'll be a test later. But I want to just put this in the water. I got some tap water from home, so we'll see what happens when we put it in here. I'm going to just fill this up here, so I can stick the probe in. And there are 3 sensors in this probe, actually. There is this right here, this part is a temperature probe. This is the dissolved oxygen sensor. You see the little yellow thing in the middle there. And then this actually on the end here, it measures the SPC. There's a little chamber in there that it measures the electricity that can go through. I don't know if I can get it in there. See the SPC. Oh. I think it's big enough here. Okay. Oh, there we go. It's in there. So now I have 7.81 dissolved oxygen and 85.2 84.9% dissolved oxygen, and the SPC is at 25, 32, 41. I could get it in there a little bit more, I think I can. Well, 60, which is pretty clean water. We're getting I mean, you know, if it was 0, it would taste like distilled water would be 0. So if you've ever tasted distilled water, you know, it tastes horrible because Sebago Lake water, I don't know if you get Sebago Lake water here, yeah, it's wonderful. It tastes great because it has minerals in it, and you taste those minerals. So there should be some minerals in the water, which means this SPC should not be 0, right? Because if this measured 0 for SPC, that would be distilled water. So this is the probe we use, and it has to be kept wet, which is why when I opened it up, some water came out of it. And so we have to take care of that because I get in trouble if I'm drinking, you know. Or the first time I used it, they said, don't ever lose this rubber thing because then you have to come back and we'll shame you. We'll have to give you one. So there's the probe, and that's how we take those measurements: temperature, specific conductance, dissolved oxygen, and then dissolved oxygen percentage from those. And you'll see some of those maps in a moment. Because I have graphs on those. I don't want to bore everybody, but we'll take a look at some graphs later because I love graphs. You know, physics teacher, graphs are my life. You know, I used to try to get my students to learn how to read a graph. It's like that's like life. That's like if you can read a graph, you can do anything, right? So here's the poll that I actually made. Because a lot of the sites were up on the bank and you can't reach down into the water. You can drop a probe into the water, but to get a water sample, my best example is the Nonsuch River. There's a lot of flow through there. And if you get too close, you can actually fall in, which is, I haven't done yet, but I always say, when there's somebody with me, I say, if you see me floating down the river, call 911, have somebody come fish me out. Because it's pretty hard to get out of there. So this is a bag that I collect the water sample in. This is a spare I had this is for the Libby River. It's marked for 9/2/23. That was last Saturday. So the bag will go on here like this. All right. And again, if you'd like to help out with this, I'd love to have volunteers. Grab it like that, okay? And then what I would do is open this up and try to keep your hands away from the opening because obviously I have E. coli, we all have E. coli and then Pterococcus on our hands, and you don't want the water to get contaminated by your hand. Now I get this down like this and get it underneath the water, level, and then push it like this. That opens the bag. See that? Opens the bag and then scoop some water in it, close it, and then try to get it out of the water. Because you'll try not to get the water that's on the surface, try to get it underneath. So I was gonna try to patent this, but I don't know if there'd be much of a demand for it. So here's my pole. And then once you get some water in it, let me put a little water in here. All right, you don't need a whole lot. You need I think the lab only needs like 10 mLs, which is not a whole lot, but I try to get like 100 milliliters in there. And then it's called a whirl pack because you do this, you whirl it, and then seal it up like that. You're supposed to have a little water in there, and then make it tight and then seal it up like that. And I would collect 9 of these out in the marsh and then drop them off at Katahdin Labs. And they test it for bacteria. Now, in freshwater, it's E. coli is the big bacteria that the DEP wants us to measure for. And that's the big one that you know about, right? Everybody's heard of E. coli. It's very dangerous. It's found in human feces mostly. And that's why most people get sick from E. coli. But in salt water, it's Enterococcus, which is a related bacteria. So we test for enterococcus in the saltwater parts of the saltwater tributaries. So, and again, in order to test for the health of the salt marshes, for the health of the clam flats, they want to know about enterococcus. So that's what we test for there. So that's what I do. And again, it's great because you go out in the morning. It's like we go out at 8 in the morning. So it's usually a nice day. You go out there and the marsh is so beautiful in the morning. It's really fun to go out there. So I enjoy doing that. And then again, here's what we do. We use a probe to test for water temperature, dissolved oxygen content, dissolved oxygen percentage, and specific conductance. Microsiemens per centimeter. A Siemen, if you think about a Siemen, is a measure of electrical conductance. Okay, and micro means millionths of a Siemen. Millionths of a Siemen. A Siemen is a large amount of conductance, like a copper wire would be like I think 10 Siemens. That's what its conductance is. Pretty good. And then per centimeter, obviously, the longer it is, the harder it is to get through. Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to do is take a look at some of the results. Oh no, here we go. Here's the map that I told you. Here's the map, and this is in a report that I made to the board in January of 2022. It shows all of our sites. Here's Jones Creek. This is down by what used to be Snow's Canning. If you're a native here, you know where that is. Snow's Canning right there, down by the clam bake. Cascade Brook. This is right next to the Audubon Center. The Audubon Center is like right here, and then right at that bend, that's the Audubon Center. That's Cascade Brook. And again, these are all, we chose these places because they're close enough to a road where we didn't have to go tromping over somebody's property. And so we could get to them easily. And then Phillips Brook actually has been identified by the DEP as having issues. And I think most of the problems in Phillips Brook have originated because of the developments around Dunstan Corner. Now there's some of the developments there when they built the retaining ponds for when it rains. Of course, if you have a development, you're going to wipe out all of the natural vegetation that's going to stop the rain from all rushing down into the river all at once. And they have what they call retaining ponds, which stops everything that goes inside the development on the tar should go in the retaining pond and then should be released slowly into the river. Well, because they weren't designed right, too much water was flowing into the Phillips Brook and it was degrading the channel, which means most of the channel, this is Phillips Brook here, right? It would meander like this back and forth like a brook does, right? But because there was so much high flow during water events, it was being more channelized and was taking out some of those natural meanders. And the meanders also contain pools where fish would live, and if you have a straight shot, there's less pools for fish to live in. So obviously it's less conducive to wildlife if the channel is degraded. And also they're worried about the quality of the water there. So that data will be there for them as well. Here's Finnard Brook, which is in the middle of the marsh, really. It's mostly, there's only a small brook that goes up in here. It goes up this way. This is the Dunstan River here. But the Finnard Brook goes up in there. There's a lot of tidal flow there, so a lot of salt water there. And then over here we have Willowdale Stream, which goes into, here's the Willowdale Golf Course. You can see it right here. It goes right through Willowdale Stream here. And it goes through Willowdale Golf Course. And here's Millbrook, the one I talked about before, the one that was degraded, and that comes down right here into the marsh as well. And then on the other side, we have only two sites on the other side, the Nonsuch River, which is the biggest tributary. That's really the major river. And most of the fresh water coming into the marsh comes through the Nonsuch River. And then the Libby River over here, which again, there's not a whole lot of freshwater flow because the freshwater flow would come up from over this area here. And it's not a huge area. Nonsuch River goes all the way up into Gorham. So there's more area that it draws from, and therefore more fresh water. So those are the 8 sites that we test. Most of them are like there is, like this is, there's a big, here, there are some big culverts that go underneath the road here. Same thing here, there's big culverts, and we're actually on a little bank right here. Liberty River, same thing, there's two big culverts that that feed the water underneath this road. The Nutsuch River is a big bridge, and we have to kind of crawl down around the bridge. You might have driven by at one point and seen somebody standing on that bridge, dropping something into the water. That's one of our testers, just dropping the probe down from the bridge. Millbrook, we kind of go down into a little area and test there. That's a really nice site. Willowdale, we test on a culvert. So, and the same thing with Finnerbrook, it's a culvert. And Phillipsbrook, we're right by the riverbank. So those are the sites that we test. And again, it takes about 2 hours to do our collecting. And we started at 8, we're down about 10. So it's not a huge time commitment, but kind of a fun thing to do. And get out and see the marsh. So if you're interested, if you leave your email out, I'll send you the information that you need to figure that out.
What's the color coding there? Mean anything?
I think these orange lines are to show you where the watershed breaks. Like in here is all going to Cascade Brook. I'm pretty sure that's what those are for. I'm not sure what the green lines are for. Not sure what the green lines are for. Those might be like ridges. I'm not sure what they are. Maybe those also delineate the watershed. I'm not sure. And here's a picture of us taking some samples. This is, where is that? That is the Finnard Brook right there. And there's Betsy Barrett right there, one of the board members. And is that Steve right there? I think that's Steve Finnett right there. And this is at Willowdale Stream. So to give you an idea what we do. It's nice when you get young kids because they can kind of scramble over these rocks. It's a little harder for us older folks. All right, and then I wanted to go over a report. Now I have 3 years worth of data from 2019 to 2021, and I composed a report that I gave to the board about the data that we've collected. Now, since then, I have a whole another year and plus a half a year from this year, so there's more data coming. I'll probably be making out another report at the end of this year or next year. And if you're interested in looking at that report, it'll probably be on the Friends of Scarborough Marsh website. They'll probably get it up there eventually.
It's there.
Oh, this report is there, yes, but I mean, I'll probably make another report. Okay, so, all right, so, and again, here I talk about the methodology, how we chose the site, that they should major feed point, each site was easily accessible, and then have a point where sampling was easily accomplished. Some more easy than others, I have to say that. There's a couple that I kind of, it's like, geez, do I have to go to that one? It's like, and then after I'm done, it's like, phew, I got out of there, I didn't fall in. So we work with DEP also to identify the sites, and there's the map you just saw. And then bacteria counts. So here is this is just temperature right here. This is the first indicator right here. Temperature, and this is just temperature, this one chart. You can see it's in Celsius. So the highest temperature here was in the first year we did it, got up to 20, 22. Now we're getting a lot of times it got up to almost 28 degrees in the summer. It got really hot and it was really dry that year, which meant the water was really warmer that year. But you can see the general trend. This is a summer. This would be the summer of 2019. And then obviously this is where we didn't connect. This is where we didn't collect any data. And here's the summer of 2020. And again, this is the winter where we didn't collect any data. And this is the summer of 2021. So you can see the general trend. In the spring, it's colder. and then it gets warmer in the summer and then colder again in the fall every time. So again, you got 3 years there. Gee, it looks like it's getting a little colder. I don't know, but it's, you know, we need more years than that to tell, really. So again, it's hard to make a lot of conclusions from 3 years, but that'll give you an idea what the data does look like. Each of these different colors are like light orange is for Millbrook, so you can see Millbrook is right here. That's Millbrook of the light orange. The olive is for Phillipsbrook. Where's that? That's, ooh, you can't really see that. It's in here somewhere. And then a yellow is for Nonsuch River. Oh, this must be the Nonsuch River up here. That's the yellow. And then orange, this is light orange here. Olive green is for Willowdale. There's the green right there, kind of in the middle. And the purple, I think these ones up on top here are gonna be the saltwater ones, usually warmer than the freshwater ones. The 3 freshwater ones are down here. And these are the saltwater ones, which are always warmer. Because this, so if you think about the salt waters coming from the ocean, and the fresh water is coming usually from underneath the ground, so it starts out colder. And the brackish water or the salt water starts out warmer, so you get warmer water from the saltwater sites. Again, it's just if you kinds of stuff that you can see, which is kind of cool. Again, I'm a kind of a data geek, so I love this stuff. Here is this is dissolved oxygen. Okay, this is the freshwater feeders. Now, if there's 2 lines here, this one is class A. So the DEP says anything above this blue line is class A. And they classify rivers class A, B, and C. And this is for class B. This is for class B right here, is this horizontal line here. And as you can see, most of the, and again, here you can see the saltwater sites are these darker colors down here. They're all kind of clumped together. And a lot of times they're below the class B or C. I can't remember what this is. This is class C. This is class C. This is class A and B. Yeah, and this is class C. So you can see they're dipping below the class C designation. Even some of the freshwater sites here will dip below there at one point or another. So dissolved oxygen in general, our freshwater tributaries are in really good shape. They're staying above the class A. Even Phillipsbrook, which is they were worried about. I think that's the olive one right here. It goes below a couple times. You can see it right here. It's dipping below the blue. But for the most part, it's in good shape. And again, the saltwater tributaries, while they're below, I think, you know, it's harder to say whether that's an indicator of the whole overall marsh health or whether that's just a function of the water that's coming in from the ocean and flushing in and out from the ocean. Because again, it's like a big bathtub. Gets drained during low tide, and high tide it gets filled back up mostly from the water in the ocean. And again, if you try to look at trends over 3 years, knowing what I know, I would say that dissolved oxygen is pretty much the same thing as it was, as you see here. And again, from year to year, it's not changing a whole lot. You know, it's staying in the same general ranges. Certainly some rivers are up and down more than others. And again, even if you look at last year's data and this year's data, it's still pretty close to the same. And then here's the SPC chart. And this is just for the salt waters. These are the saltwater sites only because it's so much higher than the freshwater sites that I couldn't put it on the same scale because the freshwater sites they're all right down near 0 if I put them all on the same graph. But this will give you an indication of how I think pure salt water is around 40,000 microsiemens per centimeter. Which is where some of these are, you know, where some of these tributaries are mostly salt water. again, this yellow one is that's the Nonsuch River, which is the one that's which has the most amount of fresh water in it in relation to salt water. So the yellow line is below all the other ones on almost every indicator. But still very high compared to some of the saltwater, the freshwater sites. All right, and then here's the freshwater sites here. And something happened to this chart, so you can't really see it very well, because I have a couple of anomalous. Something happened here that those 2 points should not be there. They should be down here. I think something funny happened to those points, all 3 points there. So you can't see where they are, but again, for the most part, the SPC content in the freshwater tributaries is not alarming. So it's there's nothing there that would alarm somebody that would say, okay, that's a dirty polluted water. It's actually, and it looks pretty, if you're down there and you look at those fresh waters, it's pretty clear. The water's pretty clear. So there's no big alarm to be had there. So, and then here is this is the fecal coliform? Is that what this is? Yes. Okay, yes, this is coliform, and these are freshwater sites. These are the freshwater sites, yes. And again, here you can say class A and C are right here on this yellow horizontal line. And again, there's a couple. This is Phillips Brook here with the green line, and it dips below quite a bit. You know, it dips quite below quite a bit. So I think you would have the most concern about that tributary. So, and again, when I've looked at data from the last 2 years, it's kind of following that same pattern. So, and again, Millbrook, I think Millbrook is in the orange, and then the olive, that's gotta be Willowdale, yeah. So, and again, they all get below the yellow, the blue line, but, you know, sometimes that's dependent upon weather. If you get a large rainstorm, there's E. coli appears naturally in the environment. It's in decaying leaves and things like that. And the test is not sophisticated enough to delineate between natural E. coli that occurs in animals in nature and E. coli from human waste remains. So it's hard, you know, if you get a large runoff, you'll see a spike in E. coli sometimes, which is probably what happened right here. We had a lot of rain that day a couple of days before we went out, and they all spiked. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an unhealthy river. Yeah. And again, we take all kinds of data. We take a lot of data on, we call it observational data, and we will measure things like the smell of the water, the looks of the water, the water level, is it high, medium, low? What kind of habitat is it? Is it a cascade? Is it a riffle? Is it a run in the river? If there's any foul odors, what the tidal stage is, whether it's a storm flow or a natural flow, if there's been a storm before. So we keep data on all of that, and it all goes into the DEP website, which I don't have a link here for. I probably should have put the link in there. Maybe it's here somewhere. Let's see. Here's my conclusion. Some reasons for optimism for the overall health of the Marsh's water sources and dissolved oxygen. There are also some troubling signs. And then as the more data is collected, these patterns become, that's what you say when you're not sure. As more data is collected, the patterns will become more apparent and addressed in more detail. Yeah. More data is needed to bacteria levels over time to determine the severity of the issue. Okay, so there you go. So that's my report, and that was a little bit more than a year ago. At this point, I'd like to turn it over if you have any questions, and if you're interested in helping out, I appreciate that as well. Questions, like to open it up to any questions people have. Wow. Let there be light.
When did you start gathering data?
Uh, with the DEP, we started in 2019, but we were collecting data before that. So we started in about 2016, 2017, 2018. We have data from those years also. But this report was based upon the VRMP, that's the program, Volunteer River Monitoring Program. If you go there, you can see all these charts, you can make charts and stuff. All the data is right there, you can look at it, not just from Scarborough Marsh, but from watersheds all through the state of Maine, which is pretty cool. There are volunteers all through the state of Maine that collect data like this. Not as sophisticated as mine, of course.
Fancy tool.
Yeah. But there's a lot of stuff there you can see. And like I said, I went there and I made these charts. You can make your own charts and stuff. Pretty neat. Pretty neat. You can click on a site, you can see all the data from one site. So it's pretty nice. Right. Any other questions? Yes.
Have you yourself noticed any evidence of sea level being higher? I know you're not measuring heights, you're measuring.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, you know, like this year we had so much rain that I definitely noticed that the vernal pools out there are higher. But that doesn't necessarily mean the sea level is rising. But I think what you would look for is more degradation of the riverbank, and I've definitely seen that. I've seen the riverbanks degrading, sometimes alarmingly so, and that's a sign that the height of the ocean is rising. So I don't think it's, you know, I don't think you can deny that that's happening. It's hard to deny that it's happening. We don't collect data on height because, again, we have such a large tides, especially here in Maine. If I was in Florida, which I wasn't last winter, but if I was in Florida, it would be easy because the tides are only like 3 feet. So it'd be easier to measure a mean sea level. But here it's a little more difficult because we don't always catch it right at low tide. Because, you know, we're 20 minutes off, an hour off, something like that. So, but I've been very successful at having us go out there, so it's at the right tidal stage. So every site pretty much looks the same when I get there. If it looks funny, it's like maybe I didn't time it right. It's more like that than it is to be able to tell. But again, if you look at the banks, you can see the banks definitely degrading, and all of these tidal sites, the banks are degrading. They're getting steeper and steeper as time goes in, and they shouldn't be that steep. And that's a sign that they're degrading. You know, as a hydrogeologist, I would tell you that. All right, thank you so much, everybody.
All right. Good evening. I'm Jamie Fitch, the Sustainability Manager for the town of Scarborough. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the streams that Greg mentioned, and one that he didn't mention because it is not part of the Scarborough Marsh watershed. So I will be talking about restoring Scarborough streams, particularly Red Brook, which we haven't heard about yet this evening, because it flows to Casco Bay, and Phillips Brook, which Greg mentioned, flows to the Scarborough Marsh. And I'm going to just give a little bit of an overview about our streams and stormwater and watersheds, and kind of elaborate a little bit on some of the terms that you've already heard Greg mention this evening. So looking at the town of Scarborough, these are our watersheds. We'll talk a little bit more about watersheds in a second. So those blobs on there represent different water bodies in town. And I've tried to give a little bit of context to orient where we are in town. So Greg talked about Phillips Brook. Let's see if I can use my mouse here. So this is Phillips Brook. It includes the Dunstan Corner area. He mentioned Millbrook. On this map, Millbrook and Willowdale, which Greg mentioned, are combined into one watershed. So we've got the Downs and Oak Hill. The Spurwink River includes Pleasant Hill, None Such River includes 8 corners, and Red Brook is up here. So this is kind of near, the Turnpike and 295 interchange. Scarborough Gallery is up in that area, close to the main mall. So Red Brook flows, to Clark's Pond, the Fore River, and then Casco Bay. And we have a small piece of the Long Creek watershed up here, which is the main mall area of South Portland. So our 3 impaired streams in Scarborough are Long Creek, Red Brook, and Phillips Brook. I'm focusing this evening on Red Brook and Phillips Brook because Long Creek is a whole other beast in and of itself and has a whole separate effort, joint effort between City of Portland, City of South Portland, City of Westbrook, Town of Scarborough, and the private landowners within that watershed to restore that brook. So that is a whole other beast that I could talk about at another time, or other members of town staff could talk about at another time ad nauseum. We also have 2 threatened brooks based on the water quality data, and they are Millbrook and Willowdale. But at this point, the town's focus for restoration efforts have been on Red Brook and Phillips Brook. So we've heard the term watershed a couple times this evening. I've already used it multiple times. And so just want to give a little bit of context for what that means, because it is kind of an obscure concept for some people. So a watershed is the area of land that drains to a specific water body. Smaller watersheds make up larger watersheds. So in this diagram, this pond here has its own watershed, which is part of a larger watershed for these streams. And these streams lead into an even larger river, lake or ocean. And so all of the water that falls on the land has to flow somewhere, and the area that it flows to is considered a watershed. So whenever your feet are on the ground, you are standing in a watershed. A lot of people get confused when you are driving down the road and you'll see now entering such and such a watershed. And really it should have said now leaving this watershed and entering another watershed, because wherever you are in a watershed. And the activities that we do on the land where we are standing can affect water bodies even miles and miles away because of this watershed concept. And because water flows downhill. And so I want to talk a little bit about developed versus undeveloped watersheds and give some context for how this pollution gets into our water. So this is the beautiful Pleasant Hill Preserve. Thank you, Scarborough Land Trust. I stole your photo, representing our undeveloped watershed. So this is kind of the balance of what happens with precipitation, rain, melted snow, in an undeveloped watershed. The majority of it will infiltrate or soak into the ground. Another large portion of it will evaporate or be taken up by trees and other vegetation, and a small percentage, about 10%, will run over the land and into a water body someplace. The vegetation and the soils act as natural filters for that water, removing a lot of the pollutants that may be on the ground. But then we move to our developed watershed. So this is a picture of an aerial photo of Oak Hill. And our balance is very different. So very little of that water will infiltrate into the ground. And that's because of what we call impervious cover or impervious surfaces, which are hard surfaces like roads, rooftops, and parking lots, where water obviously can't soak into the ground. And so it is forced to run off. So you can see that large arrow shows 55% of the water that falls on the ground actually running off instead of soaking into the ground. And when that water flows over the ground, it picks up pollution as it goes. And so we call that stormwater or stormwater runoff or polluted runoff. So stormwater is runoff that flows over the land plus anything carried along with it. The pictures on here on the slide represent some of the most common pollutants that are in our water, including weed and bug killers and fertilizers, pet waste, salt from winter maintenance activities, trash and debris, and soil. And actually, in freshwater, soil is typically the largest pollutant by volume that's impacting our waters. And so when we are in more urbanized or developed areas, we see a lot of these catch basins or storm grates in parking lots and in roadways. And these are designed to collect water and channelize or move the water to another location. There's a pretty common misconception that the water that enters into these storm grates is treated at, say, a sewage treatment plant, and that is not true. So in probably 99% of the cases, the water that falls in or is collected in that catch basin is going directly into a local waterway, which means the pollution that is in that water is also going directly into a local waterway. And so when we are, when we have more runoff because of our paved surfaces and more runoff because of our storm events, it's been a super rainy summer. Can imagine how much water has been flowing into our local waterways through these storm drain systems and how much pollution has been carried along with it. So not only does the stormwater runoff carry pollution into our streams, but it can also degrade the structure of the streams or the stream channels themselves. So these are photos of Phillips Brook. You can see, this one is taken in the fall. It wouldn't necessarily look like this when the vegetation is all leafed out or anything like that. But there's a couple issues with our streams in developed areas. And the first one is that we are affecting the vegetation or removing the vegetation that is along those stream corridors that is really important for filtering those pollutants, but also holding the soil in place. I mentioned soil is a major pollutant of our waterways. When we remove the vegetation that will help hold that soil in place, it allows the channels to erode more easily. Another issue with sending more runoff into our streams is that the water doesn't have anywhere, there's too much volume of water traveling through those streams. And because we've developed on our floodplains, our streams and rivers are no longer able to overflow into the floodplain and flood like they're supposed to, and then allow that water to soak into the ground and recede into the rivers as time goes on. So instead, that water ends up eroding the channel, cutting it down deeper. And so we get these big downcut banks. So these steep slopes there. That's not what you see in an undeveloped watershed. So because we are sending so much water through these streams, the streams themselves are eroding because there's no place for the water to go and the channel has to accommodate that water somehow. And so they're eroding down farther. And so I mentioned that Scarborough has 3 impaired streams. And what does that actually mean? It is where the streams have pollution levels and channel conditions that make it difficult for stream life to survive. So Maine DEP will sample our streams on a semi-regular basis. Usually it's every 5 years or so is kind of their stream monitoring cycle. And so they'll test for a lot of the chemistry type things that Greg was talking about. So looking at dissolved oxygen levels, looking at temperature and things like that. But then they also do what they call macroinvertebrate sampling. A macroinvertebrate is just a bug that lives in the stream. And so there are certain insects that can not live in polluted water. And so those are the types of bugs that they are really looking for so that they have a good understanding of the health of the stream. So if they put out rock bags, which are mesh bags filled with rocks that they put in strategic places in the stream, leave them there for a set amount of time, collect those bags, go through them, and then kind of go through and characterize what type of bugs are in those bags. So, and they will also do kind of shorter term sampling studies where they'll go out with a net and try to catch some of these in a kick net, for example. So they're looking at a little bit of a longer time with the rock bags and a very short amount of time with the kick nets. They find caddis flies, stone flies, mayflies, and Dobson flies that gives them a good indication that these streams are healthy, because these are the insects and the bugs and critters that are very sensitive to pollution. There are some that are a little bit more tolerant of pollution, like dragonfly larvae, where they're still good to have in there, but they're a little bit more tolerant of pollution in water. And then there are other macroinvertebrates or critters in the stream that can live pretty much anywhere. Those are like leeches and certain snails and things like that. So they'll collect these water samples and go through and see what kind of life is living in there. And that's how they make the determination of that plays a large role into their determination for how healthy or unhealthy a stream is. All right, so I want to introduce you a little bit to the two watersheds that I'm going to focus on today. So starting with Red Brook, its watershed, so the area that contributes water to that stream, is about 3.2 square miles. The brook itself is just over 7 miles long, starts up in West Scarborough and travels down through, you can see, let me see if I can find my mouse here, Running Hill Road. County Road is up here, Running Hill Road. And the interstate exchange is down here, and it flows into South Portland, where, as I said, it goes into Clark's Pond, then the Boar River, and then Casco Bay. So our watershed for Red Brook includes 3 different municipalities. The bulk of it is in Scarborough, but there's also a small amount in Westbrook and South Portland. I should have mentioned when I talked about the watershed slide, the developed versus undeveloped watershed slide. When we, research has shown that when watersheds have 10% impervious cover, so when 10% of a watershed is a hard surface made up of hard surfaces like roads, rooftops, and parking lots, that's when streams start to show signs of stress and degradation. Red Brook has about, as of, I want to say 2012, its watershed was about 16% impervious. So 16% of this watershed was hard surfaces. A lot has happened in Scarborough since 2011, 2012. So that number is likely grown. And there are areas down here in the southern portion of the watershed, which are much higher than 16% impervious, because that is a major commercial development area. And Phillips Brook, a little bit smaller than Red Brook, its watershed is only 1.3 square miles, and the brook itself is 2.77 miles long. The majority of the watershed is within Scarborough. Only a very small amount is in Scarborough, or in Saco, excuse me. And so we can see the main turnpike here, and Route 1 down here, Dunstan Corners in this area. And this watershed is approximately 9% impervious. So we haven't quite hit that tipping point yet in Phillips Brook, but we're getting close. And so recognizing what has been happening in Red Brook and Phillips Brook, the town undertook management planning processes for both watersheds over the past 12 years or so. So Red Brook's watershed management plan was finalized in 2011. Phillips Brook's plan was finalized in 2018. And so these plans outline the conditions in the streams at that point in time, talk a little bit about the history, and talk about action items and priorities that the town should undertake in order to start restoring these streams. And I will say that like I said, a lot has happened since 2011, and the town recognizes that. And in our fiscal year 24 budget, the town council allocated funds to update this watershed plan. So starting this year, and probably going for the next couple of years, we will be working with South Portland and Maine DEP, Maine DOT, Maine Turnpike Authority, and landowners to update this plan, so we have a better understanding of what's happening in that watershed and how we should be moving forward to protect that watershed and restore it. But once these plans were finalized, so we got grant funding to do these two plans. And once they were finalized, we became eligible for additional grant funding to begin implementing these plans. So I'm gonna walk through some of the projects that were done as a result of these plans being completed. So starting with Red Brook, and in the Red Brook watershed, a lot of the work that was done here was done through public-private partnership. So the town was successful in obtaining grants, working with partners to obtain grants. And then we started working with private landowners to start addressing some of the sites that were identified in the watershed management plan. So this is Kayla Lane. It was a private way. Some of the issues at this site, so the picture on the left is the before. These culverts were undersized. So when culverts are undersized, they can blow out very easily or, just fail during large storm events. They cause additional channel erosion because the water pools, because it can't move efficiently through the openings. And these culverts didn't allow fish and other aquatic organisms to pass through them. So even though we had decent wildlife and fish colonies in Red Brook, they weren't able to move upstream because this was considered a barrier. So we worked with used grant funds and worked with the local landowners to replace those two culverts with a larger box. Oops, let's go back. A larger box culvert. It has a natural bottom, which makes it easier for fish and other organisms to pass upstream and downstream. And that opening in that culvert is 1.2 times the width of the stream, which means when we get hot rain events and flooding events, not as much erosion is going to happen because the opening is wider than the stream channel itself, so more water will be able to move through that opening. Another site was this abandoned culvert on New Road. This was a farm culvert. This one was an amazing project that was fairly easy in the grand scheme of things because we literally just had to take a culvert out of the stream that no longer needed to be there. So again, working with the property owners in that area, Public Works helped remove that culvert. They did the work in the winter time when everything was frozen to minimize disturbance to the wetlands that were adjacent to that culvert. And the next spring it grew in and looked like a beautiful, healthy wetland, like the culvert had never been there. That was probably one of the best restoration projects in terms of time, money, and success that you can imagine, because it was literally removing a pipe that no longer needed to be there, and the area around it kind of reverted back to its natural state. And then this was a stormwater retrofit, or looking at a stormwater treatment system and making it better because it had been old, improperly sized, and didn't really provide for much treatment other than holding on to the runoff that was coming off of our property. So this is Lazy Boy off of Payne Road. This is their old stormwater pond. And we worked with them to design, to improve the capacity of that pond so it can hold more runoff, but also incorporate methods for treatment so that some of the pollutants are being removed from the runoff from that parcel, and also made it so that the pond drained more slowly. Greg mentioned that in Phillips Brook, some of the ponds, stormwater ponds that were out there, didn't do a good job releasing the water slowly. So that's called flashiness. We would get flashes in the stream where there's a lot of water moving through the system over a short amount of time. And we were able to put systems in place within this pond to help the water lead out more slowly so that we're not going to see as much erosion of the stream channel or down cutting like we had seen in those pictures in Phillips Brook. We also are in the process of completing a stream restoration site in Phillips Brook. This one has been a little bit of a bear because everything came online just before COVID hit. and then COVID hit and shut everything, made everything stop. And then our prices went sky high. So we had big plans for this site to do much more restoration work, and then our budget just didn't work. So we had to kind of modify our plans, but this is the old Public Works laydown yard on Payne Road. Before that, it was a DOT maintenance lot that was turned over to the town. It became the Public Works facility at one point, and then became their laydown yard. Phillips Brook runs back here. These red sticks right there are all invasive knotweed. And there's other invasives on the other side of the stream, including bittersweet. And so, and this was a very steep slope that basically went right down to the stream. And so we worked Public Works and hired a contractor, had engineered designs done to open up that area, remove the invasives, and you can see there's kind of two levels here. We're up on the banking here, and we restored the stream's connection to the floodplain down here. So now when we get high flow events, the stream will be able to overflow its bank into the floodplain there, rather than continuing to cut down the channel. And it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but if you look closely, there are little sticks sticking up. Those are live willow stakes. My 12-year-old son, my coworker, and I planted 2,100 live willow stakes in this the floodplain area and on the banking this past spring. We're hoping that they will take root and fill this in to become a better buffer. And we do also intend to put in some larger trees and shrubs on that banking as well to help with shading and to stabilize that soil better. So while we've got development is certainly impacting our streams, we've got pollution that is going into our streams. Some of the best things that we can do to help protect our streams and to restore our streams is to stop polluting them in the first place. So stop doing those activities on our properties when we're out walking our pets and things like that, that are going to send pollution into our waters. And so we've got, we're working on a regional level for a number of these and on a statewide level for another one, on education and outreach campaigns and other efforts that I'll touch on to help educate people about what pollution is impacting our waterways and what we should be doing to minimize that. And really not putting pollution out there in the first place is one of the best things that we can do to protect our waterways. So reduce the impact of pet waste. So this is a regional community outreach effort, and we're working on proper disposal of pet waste, because what we have seen through our own observations is that people will pick up their pet's waste, but they don't always put it in the trash can. So we're finding trash bags on our trails, at our beaches, in our catch basins, because people think that they're gonna go to a sewage treatment plant and be filtered out. Doesn't work that way. So the big message here is thank you for picking up your pet's waste. Put it in a trash can. Don't throw it up in a tree. Don't leave it on the side of a trail. Probably don't stick it underneath your windshield wiper on your car, because you don't want it in your car when you're driving home, because chances are it's going to fly out and end up in the roadway anyway. So as I said, we're working with 13 other municipalities in this area to get some information out at key locations to pet owners about proper disposal of pet waste. We're also encouraging healthy landscaping practices. So, maintaining your landscape without weed and bug killers and using proper fertilization. We're starting to promote lawn alternatives. So like edible landscapes and rain gardens and pollinator gardens. So minimizing our lawn sizes in favor of these more beneficial types of landscapes that can benefit us and benefit wildlife. Rain gardens will will help filter pollutants out of stormwater, and encouraging proper disposal of yard waste. So not dumping your leaves and your grass clippings into a wetland or onto a stream bank, you know, creating a composting pile away from away from those sensitive areas, or bringing them, if you're in Scarborough, to Casella and Westbrook, where Scarborough residents can dispose of that for free. And we're also looking at addressing pollution from winter maintenance activities. So while salt in the marsh, not a big deal, salt in our streams is. And that's one of the things, the specific conductance that Greg was talking about. We're actually seeing specific conductance numbers in our streams that are really impacting those macroinvertebrates, or those bugs that are living in our streams. And so this happens because for a number of reasons. You would imagine our specific conductance numbers would be high in the spring when the snow is melting and we've been putting a lot of salt down, because you know, that's what happens in the wintertime, so that we have roads that we can drive on and sidewalks that are safe to walk on. But we do see a little bit of a spike there, but the bigger issue is when we're doing monitoring in the summertime. We're seeing very high specific conductance levels in the summertime, which is an indication that that salt is getting into our groundwater. And once again, in the summertime, when we have low flow events in our streams, the groundwater is what is feeding into those streams, less so than runoff. And that's when it's an issue, when it's a constant stream of salt-laden water entering our streams. And unfortunately, there is no treatment to remove salt. The only way to keep salt out of our waterways is to not put it or not use it in the first place. And so we're working with municipalities statewide and working with local legislators to develop a program that would offer winter maintenance contractors and public works crews, public works departments, limited liability coverage if they use preferred practices that will limit the use of salt on parking lots, on roadways, and on walkways. And so through that, we're also working on providing education for operators, and then also outreach to the community so that we can all have reasonable expectations for what a road should look like in the wintertime, and what we should expect during, you know, storm events. Probably shouldn't expect black pavement during blizzard conditions. That's kind of unrealistic, and it's not good for our streams, and especially our small streams, but also rivers and lakes as well. And so talking about our restoration next steps and what the town is focusing on, we're updating our ordinances. So we are looking at increasing setbacks and buffer requirements to protect our stream corridors. We are so that town of Scarborough is subject to a Clean Water Act permit, and we are required to, through that permit, to pass a low impact development ordinance. So that is one thing that we are really focusing on this year. Low impact development is basically a methodology that will require developers to look at their parcel as part of a larger, take a holistic approach and look at it as a larger landscape. They'll have to identify sensitive areas and try to avoid them. They'll have to treat stormwater close to the source, so no longer piping things very far away, trying to use as many natural methods and green methods, so like landscaping and vegetation and things like that for treating their stormwater. They'll have to minimize those impervious surfaces, those hard surfaces, and minimize land disturbance in development. That is going to be a big task, especially considering the amount of development that's currently happening in Scarborough. And we're also looking at upgrading and strengthening our sewer requirements. So I didn't really talk much about sewer and septic. Septic systems can be a pretty major source of pollution to our waterways. And so increasing the distance that a person has to be in order to connect to sewer. So right now, I think it's if you're within, don't quote me on this, but I think it's if you're within 100 feet of a public sewer and you want to replace your septic system, you will be required to tie into the public sewer. We would like to increase that distance. Say if you're within 500 feet of that public sewer, you'll have to connect into sewer. Because it's there's far less pollution coming from our sanitary sewer than there is from old faulty septic systems. We're updating management plans, specifically Red Brook, as I mentioned, we're going to begin work on that this year and hope to have it wrapped up probably in 2025 or so. So we have a better understanding of what's happening and a better plan moving forward for how to continue our restoration efforts. We're going to continue to seek funding for our restoration activities, grants through the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, through the US EPA, and also thinking creatively and, you know, with resilience projects and things like that. Are there ways for us to do some habitat and stormwater treatment that's also going to address water quantity, because we're seeing way more water flowing through our streams with the high frequency, high intensity storms that we've been experiencing lately. So looking at other funding opportunities there and prioritizing land conservation. The town also in this budget cycle funded an open space plan. So we'll be beginning work on that very shortly. And it's going to be essential for us to look at conserving headwater areas of our streams and also sensitive areas along the stream corridors themselves. And then continuing our outreach efforts about pollution prevention, because as I said, one of the best ways to protect and restore our streams is to make sure that the pollution isn't out there in the first place. That's what I've got. I'm happy to answer questions, talk a little bit more about what the town's doing. If you have any specific questions about what I've talked about. Also want to put in a plug for Sustainable Scarborough Day, which is happening October 1st at Wentworth School, where we'll be not necessarily talking about stream conservation, stream protection itself, but talking about other things related to it, like healthy lawn care, sustainable landscaping, land conservation, things like that. So we hope you will join us at that event. Great.
There are flyers about Sustainable Scarborough Day on the coffee table here, if anybody wants to take one.
Yes, so Sustainable Scarborough Day information on the table back there, and also a brochure about healthy lawn care. So lawn care without weed and bug killers and with proper fertilization. So just giving kind of an overview about how to get started there. There are also workshops in this area. We've partnered with the Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District to provide workshops on healthy lawn care and lawns to landscapes. They will also be at Sustainable Scarborough Day with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you haven't signed up already, the next one in this series is coming up on October 5th. And it's about the Scarborough Marsh and sea level rise.